Military Log Entry 2437, Commander Kalyx reporting. This report will sound absurd. Trust me, I know. After 20 cycles of military service, I have never filed anything remotely like this. The events I am about to describe defy our understanding of physics, biology, and frankly, common sense. But as commander of the Zentari Defense Forces 7th Battalion, I am duty-bound to record what happened during the Battle of Novus 7. Let me start with the basics. We had been fighting the Meraxian Empire for 3 standard cycles over colony world Novus 7. A beautiful world once. Azure skies, purple mountain ranges, and vast fields of luminescent flora that would pulse with light during our twin moons alignment. Now, the landscape is scarred with blast craters and burning wreckage. The Meraxians want our quantum fuel deposits, and they don't care how many civilians they slaughter to get them. Our situation was becoming desperate. The Meraxians had pushed us back to our last major settlement, New Haven. We had 50,000 civilians crammed into emergency shelters, including 15,000 children. Our force shields were failing, ammunition was running low, and morale, well, let's just say I had started hearing whispers about surrender among my troops. I was in the command center that night, studying tactical displays and trying to figure out how to defend against the next Meraxian assault with dwindling resources. Lieutenant Arxa burst in, her scales shifting to that particular shade of green that indicated extreme agitation. "Commander, our long-range sensors are picking up something strange," she reported, her antenna twitching nervously. "Strange how, Lieutenant?" I asked, not looking up from the battle plans. "Well, sir, it appears to be a small craft, but it's not matching any known propulsion signatures, and it's being pulled by the computer says 8 small life forms? That can't be right." I remember laughing. A bitter, tired sound. "Lieutenant, our sensors are probably malfunctioning again. The Meraxians have been jamming our systems for weeks." "No, sir. This is different. Look at these readings." She shoved a data pad under my snout, and I froze. The energy signature was unlike anything I had ever seen. It radiated what our sensors could only classify as joy. That's not even a measurable form of energy. And it was heading straight for our position. I ordered an immediate scan of all known species databases. Nothing matched. Not a single record in any of our vast archives mentioned a civilization capable of this technology, or these unusual energy readings. Sir Arxa's voice dropped to a whisper. "There's more. The craft appears to be originating from a planet called Earth. I've never heard of it." Neither had I. In all my years of tactical training, in all our military intelligence briefings, no one had ever mentioned Earth or its inhabitants. Yet here was something, heading straight for our war-torn colony, on the very night our situation seemed most hopeless. I made the call to hold our fire, against all standard protocols. Something in my gut, or all 3 of my digestive organs, to be precise, told me this was important, different, perhaps even game-changing. Little did I know then just how right that instinct would prove to be, and how a being known as Santa Claus would turn the tide of not just a battle, but an entire war, armed with nothing but a bag of toys and something he called Christmas spirit. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you exactly how this Santa person arrived and why the Meraxian Empire now celebrates something called Christmas. With as much enthusiasm as they once showed for planetary bombardment, the first visual confirmation came from Sergeant Nexra at Watch Station 7. "Commander, you need to see this," her voice crackled through the comm system. "The craft, it's bright red. And those life forms pulling it? They have branched appendages growing from their heads." I rushed to the observation deck, nearly colliding with Captain Yorith, whose tentacles were tangled up in sensor equipment. The sight that greeted us defied explanation. A sleek red vessel, gliding through our atmosphere without any visible propulsion system, was indeed being pulled by 8 creatures that seemed to ignore our planet's gravitational laws. "Status report," I barked, trying to maintain some semblance of military protocol. "Sir, our tracking systems are going haywire," Lieutenant Arxa responded, her claws flying over the control panel. The readings claim the vessel is simultaneously moving at faster than light speeds and completely stationary. Temperature sensors show it's both freezing cold and burning hot, and the mass calculations. They suggest the storage compartment is both empty and contains enough matter to create a small moon. That's impossible, Captain Yorith clicked his mandibles nervously. The quantum uncertainty principle doesn't work that way. Before I could respond, every warning system in our defense grid activated simultaneously. The vessel had breached our perimeter by simply passing through our force shields as if they weren't there. All units, battle stations, I ordered, more out of habit than strategic thinking. But hold your fire unless. My voice trailed off as I watched the vessel land gracefully in the middle of our most heavily mined defensive zone. The mines, primed to detect the slightest pressure change, didn't react. It was as if reality itself had decided to take a break from its usual rules. Then we saw him. A large figure emerged from the vessel, dressed in bright red garments with white trim. Its appearance was roughly humanoid, though none of us knew what a human looked like at the time. It had facial hair, white as starlight, and carried an impossibly large sack over one shoulder. "By the 7 moons," whispered Sergeant Nexra. "It's walking straight through the minefield." Not just walking, the figure was practically bouncing, making a sound that our audio sensors translated as ho 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 ho. Each step should have triggered enough explosives to vaporize a small building. Instead, wherever its boots touched the ground, the mines transformed into small clusters of red and white striped vegetation. Private Zenith, one of our youngest recruits, panicked and fired a warning shot. The plasma bolt curved around the red-suited figure like a friendly pet and dissipated harmlessly in the air, leaving behind a shower of tiny sparkling crystals. "Fascinating," exclaimed our science officer, Kalyx, who had appeared beside me clutching her data tablet. "The energy signature is off the charts. But it's not weapon-based. It's wait, this can't be right. The translator is calling it magic." "Magic isn't real," I stated firmly, trying to cling to some form of rational thought. "There must be a scientific explanation." The figure turned toward our command center and waved cheerfully. Every piece of equipment within a 100-meter radius started playing an oddly catchy tune about a red-nosed member of those antlered creatures pulling his vessel. That's when our long-range scanners detected the Meraxian battle fleet moving into attack position. Whatever this entity was, whatever its purpose, it had just landed in the middle of an active war zone. And the Meraxians weren't known for their diplomatic approach to unexpected visitors. "Should we try to communicate with it?" Lieutenant Arxa asked, her scales now cycling through colors I didn't even know she could produce. Before I could answer, the figure reached into its sack and pulled out well. Perhaps I should explain what happened next in careful detail. Because that's when things got really strange. I had seen antimatter explosions. I had witnessed the birth of artificial suns. But nothing in my military career prepared me for what happened next. The red-suited being turned away from the command center and walked straight toward Refugee Sector 12. Our security forces moved to intercept, but their legs stopped responding. Not in a hostile, paralyzed way, they simply felt an overwhelming urge to smile and stand down. Even hardened veterans like Sergeant Nexra reported feeling something they described as warm happiness spreading through their combat reflexes. Sir Lieutenant Arxa reported, her voice filled with wonder. "The refugee children. They're running toward him." My heart's nearly stopped. These were children who had spent months hiding from artillery fire, who flinched at every loud noise, who hadn't smiled since the war began. Now they were rushing out of their shelters, their parents too stunned to stop them. The being knelt down to their level, somehow managing to make eye contact with 30 children simultaneously. When he spoke, our universal translators sparked and began playing music instead of converting his words. But somehow, every child understood him perfectly. Commander Science Officer Kalyx was practically dancing with excitement. "You need to see these readings. That bag he's carrying? It's generating quantum fluctuations that shouldn't be possible. It's bigger on the inside, but not in any way our physics can explain." The being who we would later learn called himself Santa Claus reached into his bag. Our tactical systems tried to label what emerged as weapons, then toys, then impossible objects, before giving up entirely and displaying error messages in festive colors. Little Tara Vex, a refugee child who hadn't spoken since losing her parents in the Meraxian bombardment, received a crystalline structure that sang lullabies in her mother's voice. Young Kalyx from Maintenance Level 7 got a miniature spaceship that actually flew, powered by nothing but belief and something the translator kept calling Christmas spirit. "This defies every law of conservation of mass and energy," Captain Yorith exclaimed, his tentacles twisted in scientific distress. "He's creating matter from nothing. And each gift, it's exactly what each child wants. How can he know?" I watched as Santa pulled out gift after gift. A security blanket that actually produced an impenetrable force field when its young owner felt scared. A stuffed animal that could transform into a real companion when its child was lonely. Each present seemed designed not just to bring joy, but to heal specific wounds the war had inflicted. The refugee camp had transformed. Where there had been silence and fear, now there was laughter and singing. Parents who had been hollow-eyed with worry were smiling through tears as their children played with toys that should not exist. High Command was not pleased. Commander Kalyx General Zexon's hologram flickered with barely contained rage. "Explain why you have allowed an unknown entity to infiltrate our most sensitive civilian area." "Sir, with respect," I replied, watching as Santa somehow produced an entire playground from his bag, complete with swings that let children temporarily fly. "I don't think I could have stopped him if I tried. But more importantly, I don't think we should." "Have you lost your mind, Commander? This being could be a Meraxian weapon, a psychological operation. The general's rant was interrupted by a small hand tugging at his holographic uniform. It was his own granddaughter, Lyra, who was supposed to be safely hidden in the command bunker. Somehow she was now here in the refugee sector, clutching a holographic butterfly that displayed memories of happier times. "Grandpa," she said softly, "he knows about the secret tea parties we had before the war. The ones you said were too silly for a general. He gave me this so I wouldn't forget." I watched the mighty General Zexon, terror of the quantum fleet, sink to his knees beside his granddaughter. The butterfly landed on his nose, showing a memory of him wearing a ridiculous hat and pretending to be a princess for his granddaughter's amusement. That's when our perimeter alarms screamed to life. The Meraxian fleet had begun their approach. But Santa simply smiled, reached into his bag, and pulled out what looked like a small red ribbon. "Commander," Lieutenant Arxa whispered, her scales now glowing with unprecedented patterns, "whatever that ribbon is, it's giving off more power than our entire defense grid." Santa stood up, still smiling, and began walking toward the Meraxian battle line. The children waved goodbye, completely unafraid. Somehow they knew something we didn't. Something about believing in magic, about peace on Earth, whatever Earth was, and about goodwill toward all beings. I made a decision that would either end or save my career. "All units maintain position. Let him pass. And someone please figure out why our sensors are now detecting traces of something called cinnamon. The Meraxian fleet descended like a swarm of angry hornets. 500 warships, their plasma cannons charging, their hull plating gleaming with malice in our twin moon's light. Supreme Commander Thrax of the Meraxian Empire had apparently decided to end our resistance once and for all. All defensive positions, prepare for immediate contact," I ordered, knowing our remaining shields wouldn't last 5 minutes against that kind of firepower. That's when I noticed Santa walking toward the enemy fleet, still making that ho-ho-ho sound, swinging his massive red sack like he was going on a pleasant stroll. The first Meraxian shots fired. Several hundred plasma bolts streaked toward our position and transformed into streams of sparkling lights that danced through the air like playful serpents. Our gunners reported their targeting systems were now displaying recipes for something called cookies. Sir, Lieutenant Arxa called out, her voice mixing panic and amusement. "The Meraxian ground forces are reporting unusual equipment malfunctions." The reports flooded in. Every ammunition box in the Meraxian army had somehow been filled with black rocks. Their feared Titan-class battle mechs were now stomping around playing cheerful music from their weapon ports. The notorious Meraxian shock troops found their fearsome armor had turned bright red with white trim. Supreme Commander Thrax's voice boomed across all communication channels. "What sorcery is this? Who dares to make a mockery of the mighty Meraxian Empire? Santa's response came not in words, but in action. He reached into his bag and pulled out what looked like a small snow globe. With a gentle toss, it burst in the air, and suddenly the entire battlefield was covered in something white and cold that our sensors identified as frozen water crystals. Commander Sergeant Nexra's voice cracked with disbelief. The Meraxian troops, they're putting down their weapons and making sculptures out of the snow. It was true. The fearsome Meraxian warriors, conquerors of 17 star systems, were engaged in what appeared to be a snowball fight. Their Supreme Commander's next transmission consisted mainly of spluttering as one of these snowballs somehow traveled through his ship's shields and hit him directly in the face. But not all Meraxians were so easily swayed. A squadron of their elite Phantom Guards charged towards Santa, quantum blades humming. Santa simply reached into his bag and pulled out. Presents perfectly wrapped boxes that floated through the air with suspicious precision. Those are enemy combatants, Captain Urith protested. He can't just give them gifts. Oh, but he could. And he did. Each Phantom Guard received a package that, when opened, contained exactly what they needed most. One found a hologram of his estranged family. Another received a medical cure for his chronic pain. A third opened her box to find the acceptance letter to the art academy she'd secretly always wanted to attend instead of joining the military. The Meraxian command structure was falling apart, not through violence or defeat, but through something far more powerful: joy. Their fearsome warships were now decorated with blinking lights. Their military bands had spontaneously started playing festive music. And every single weapon in their arsenal had either transformed into something harmless or simply refused to work while filling the air with the scent of peppermint. "This is impossible," Supreme Commander Thrax raged. "Our quantum torpedoes can't just turn into candy canes. Our death rays cannot become strands of twinkling lights. I demand." His transmission cut off as his command ship apparently transformed into a giant gingerbread house, complete with frosting windows and gumdrop guidance systems. Through all this chaos, Santa kept walking, occasionally stopping to give gifts to particularly aggressive Meraxian soldiers. Each gift seemed to contain not just objects, but memories, hopes, and dreams long forgotten in their military indoctrination. Commander Science Officer Kara Lunx reported, her instrument smoking slightly. "I think I understand what's happening. He's not fighting them. He's reminding them of who they were before the war. And, according to these readings, he's doing it by manipulating something our sensors can only describe as the quantum structure of hope." The battlefield had become something none of us had ever seen before. Zentari and Meraxian children were building snow fortresses together. Hardened veterans from both sides were sharing stories in something Santa called hot chocolate. Even the automated defense systems had gotten into the spirit, with our killer drones now stringing lights between guard towers. But the most remarkable transformation happened in the Meraxian High Command bunker. Santa simply walked through their supposedly impenetrable walls, reached into his bag, and pulled out what looked like an ancient data crystal. When activated, it showed the original Meraxian Zentari peace treaty from 2 centuries ago. The one that had established our peoples as allies before corporate greed and political manipulation had turned us against each other. It played the speeches of friendship, showed the celebrations of unity, and reminded everyone of what we had lost. Sir Lieutenant Arxa reported, her scales now glowing with what she would later describe as Christmas colors. "The Meraxian troops are requesting a ceasefire? They want to help build a bigger snow fort for the children." And just like that, the Battle of Christmas Eve became famous not for its casualty count, but for being the first battle in history where both sides worked together to ensure every child got a chance to meet Santa Claus. The peace negotiations began in the most unusual setting in diplomatic history. A massive snow fortress built by children from both sides, decorated with twinkling quantum lights and overseen by a being who had single-handedly stopped an interstellar war with toys and treats. Supreme Commander Thrax and General Zexon sat across from each other, both wearing what Santa had called holiday sweaters that would shock anyone who tried to reach for a weapon by playing cheerful music. The tension in the room was repeatedly broken by the sound of children's laughter from outside and the inexplicable smell of freshly baked cookies. "Well," Thrax said, absently petting a toy dragon that had been following him around and purring. I suppose we should discuss terms. Perhaps General Zexon replied, trying to maintain his dignity despite wearing a hat with bells. We should start by admitting neither of us quite remembers why we were fighting in the first place. Santa stood nearby, checking a holographic list that somehow detailed the life history of every being on our planet. As the two leaders talked, really talked, for the first time in years, something remarkable happened. The quantum fuel deposits, the original cause of our conflict, were discovered to have developed unusual properties. According to Science Officer Kara Lunx's readings, they had somehow transformed into an infinite energy source that could be safely shared by both civilizations. "These readings are impossible," she exclaimed, then paused. "Though I suppose that word has lost some meaning today." As the negotiations concluded, Santa gathered everyone in the central plaza of New Haven. The snow continued to fall, but now it formed perfect geometric patterns that our scientists would spend years trying to explain. He reached into his bag one final time and pulled out what appeared to be a simple data crystal. What we received that day, I record now for posterity, was more than just information. The crystal contained what Santa called the Christmas archives. It was a complete history of a holiday from Earth, but it was also something more. Each time we accessed it, we discovered new stories, new traditions, new ways of spreading joy. The data package included technical specifications for something called candy cane propulsion that revolutionized our space travel. It contained blueprints for reindeer-class shields that could protect entire planets while generating feelings of goodwill. But most importantly, it carried the fundamental code of what Santa called Christmas spirit, an energy source powered by kindness, generosity, and joy. Before departing, Santa left us with a message. His words, translated simultaneously into all known languages, somehow managed to sound like a beloved grandparent telling a bedtime story, remember. The greatest gift isn't found in a box or a bag. It's the moment you choose to bring light to someone else's darkness. That's the real magic of Christmas, and now it's part of your story too. Then he did something truly extraordinary. He touched the snow fortress, and it transformed into a permanent structure. The Embassy of Wonder, where our peoples would gather annually to celebrate what we now call the Night of the Gift Giver. As his sleigh lifted off, breaking several more laws of physics, both Meraxian and Zentari children waved goodbye. The reindeer, which our scientists still cannot explain, left trails of light that formed a message in the sky: peace on Earth, and peace among the stars. Looking back now, 3 cycles later, I still struggle to fully explain what happened that night. Our war colleges now include a mandatory class called Tactical Applications of Joy. The Meraxian Empire has reformed into the Meraxian Fellowship of Festive Worlds. And every year, exactly when we need it most, impossible gifts appear under decorated trees in homes across both our civilizations. As a military commander, I should be concerned about an entity that can bypass all our defenses, alter matter at will, and knows everything about everyone. But instead, I find myself hoping each year to hear that familiar ho-ho-ho sound. The most remarkable thing, we're not the only ones. Reports have come in from across the galaxy of similar visits, always to places where hope is needed most. A being in red, bringing impossible gifts and leaving behind societies forever changed by encounter with something we still can't fully explain. So let this stand as my final report on the incident. The day Santa Claus came to Nova 7 wasn't just the end of a war. It was the beginning of our understanding that the universe is far more wonderful and mysterious than we had imagined. And if you're reading this, Santa, the milk and cookies we now leave out are made according to your specifications, though I still can't explain how you eat them all in one night. End log. In Commander Kalyx. Zentari Peace Force. Department of Holiday Operations.